is the importance that data plays in developing these models and refining them to better serve farmers.
Bringing together a community around how do we share that data, build a much bigger corpus representing smallholder farmers for pre-training and post-training was really important.
This new AI era offers a similar promise and a similar opportunity to have it impact at scale. But it means that we're having to think through the responsible use of these technologies and to ensure that we don't betray the trust of farmers as we design, develop, and deliver these services.
But interestingly, with these new conversational interfaces where you have two-way flow of information directly to a farmer, you can actually start to build up a profile about that farmer without having to do a big government-led data collection effort.
One of the resounding messages was, yes, we want to take advantage and apply these new tools in the AI era, but we want it to have some sovereignty over the data, the models, the infrastructure to unlock that impact. Welcome to Grounded Intelligence. I'm your host, David Bergvinson, and for the last 30 years, I've had the privilege of working with farmers around the world in different production systems, hearing about their story, about the challenges they face, these aspirations that they have for their farm, their family, and their communities. But so often is the case, they're held back by a wide range of constraints, whether that's rain-fed production systems impacted by climate change, whether it's access to markets that are fair and give them an income that they can live off of, or just access to the right inputs so that they can grow the right variety, access the right fertilizer, or get the right extension service for them to realize their full economic potential. I've been privileged to work with industry leaders around the world in crop improvement, and being a corn breeder or maize breeder myself for more than 20 years gave me a perspective on engaging with farmers to understand the requirements. What are the needs of that product? What does it need to contain in order for it to be useful? So we call that demand-driven innovation or human-centered design. I've also had the privilege of working with the Gates Foundation and setting up digital agriculture 15 years ago. And a lot of the lessons there, we had all this promise of this new digital technology, and yet it really didn't deliver at the scale that we had hoped. This new AI era offers a similar promise and a similar opportunity to have it impact at scale. But it means that we're having to think through the responsible use of these technologies and to ensure that we don't betray the trust of farmers as we design, develop, and deliver these services. So I'm very excited about this topic. It's a topic which I've been passionate about for more than 15 years. And it's exciting to see it coming to fruition now with the advent of artificial intelligence. So join us on this journey. We look forward to your comments, your suggestions. Give us some hard topics to tackle on the podcast, because we would love to make sure that we're capturing a wide range of perspectives and challenging topics to position this technology to deliver on its promise. I would just like to introduce you to a community that is really galvanizing around this important topic of the application of artificial intelligence to empower farmers. And that community is called AgXAI. It's a community that has built over a number of years on the use of information technology services. And this community is specifically focused on the responsible use of artificial intelligence to make sure that we're not leaving farmers behind in emerging markets like Africa, Asia, or Latin America. And so you ask, well, what is this AgXAI community doing? Well, it's doing many things. First, it's just finding each other, organizations and individuals with common cause to unlock the power of AI to empower farmers. We're also looking at a range of challenging topics that are important in creating the ecosystem or setting the table for artificial intelligence to be successful. So that includes data that is actually representative of the communities that we're looking at, and how we aggregate and deliver that data to a wide range of organizations. It's around model development that is tuned to the needs of communities, that also represents those that often don't have a strong voice, such as minority groups or women or youth. It's around benchmarking to compare models because so many of them are being developed now, but we don't really have a way of comparing them against each other, especially as it relates to agriculture and advisory services for farmers. It's around localization to understand the context of how these models are going to operate and the value that they can deliver, and making sure that that context is integrated into the design. It's around delivering these outputs so that they're accessible and understandable to farmers so that they can act on the recommendations or they can access a market. Uh, it's around being inclusive in the access of these tools. So this involves not just the knowledge that's being delivered, but it's at a price point that farmers can afford. It's around policies that create the enabling environment for these AI tools to be used responsibly and not betray the trust of farmers as we deploy them. So all of these and other issues are interconnected to unlock the full value and to preserve the trust with farmers in this rapidly evolving AI era. So the AgX AI community is dealing with all of these through a wide range of what we're calling discussion papers. You're invited to contribute to these. We welcome your input. You can see them on our AgX AI website, and the link to that is provided here. And we invite you to provide comments so that we can ensure that these papers are robust, that they can stand the test of time, and most importantly, stand the test of deployment and scale to deliver these services to farmers. The AgX AI community is also looking for opportunities to develop resources in a coordinated manner so that we work in concert towards unlocking the full value of artificial intelligence to empower farmers. And finally, it's just fun to get connected to a community that is very progressive and helping stay abreast of the rapid evolution of AI, not just in the ag sector, but also in adjacent sectors that have relevance to the agriculture sector. So we're on a very exciting and fast-moving journey. We hope you enjoy our Grounded Intelligence podcast, but also be active in the community and subscribe to the AgX AI website so that you stay informed about these developments and can contribute to the design of these AI-enabled services to empower farmers. Okay, today I'm very excited on Grounded Intelligence to talk with Stewart Collis, Senior Program Officer with the Gates Foundation, who is leading their digital ag advisory services and many other domains related to the application of artificial intelligence. So this is a very timely and important conversation. Stewart comes with a rich history within the IT space to serve smallholder farmers in particular in emerging markets. So his history includes working with Texas A&M around crop modeling and co-founded a company called Aware, where they delivered weather advisories through observed weather grids across the world, especially emerging markets. He also worked at ICRAF, a CG center focused on agroforestry, and is currently with the Gates Foundation leading their strategy around digital agriculture, in particular the application of artificial intelligence, a very fast-moving and timely topic. So with that, Stewart, welcome to the podcast, and just interested to know some of your top of mind thinking related to AI and agriculture before we dive in here. What's sort of top of mind for you today?
Yeah, thanks, David, and good to see you again. Yeah, I mean, top of mind just is that, AI is obviously having a lot of impact around the world in many new and interesting ways. And I think, the catalyst was when ChatGPT came out, and clearly our chair of the Gates Foundation is very interested in this topic. So it's a big focus for us is how do we ensure that this technology is equitably distributed around the world, including, for smallholder farmers.
Yeah, I recall the story of you first launching a contract or grant in this domain, and then literally the day after, ChatGPT dropped and sort of rapidly brought a change of mindset. But I guess that's sort of been the status quo since that point onward. Things are just rapidly evolving, and just trying to stay ahead of it. and making sure it's used responsibly. A lot of conversations around this responsible use of AI, and that's what this AgX AI community is all about: is bringing together like-minded people that want to unlock the power of AI, but do it in a responsible manner. So, thanks for your leadership in this domain. I think that leads to one of our questions around uh, the grant that you currently have with the AgX AI community and the topics that we're focused on. Can you give us a little bit more framing around what you're looking for out of this community, especially as it relates to the taxonomy and a systems approach to responsible use of AI in ag?
Yeah, I think when we first started looking at this space, as you said, it's fast moving. It was new to everybody. A lot of organizations came to the Gates Foundation, given our founders' background, assuming that we would have some answers around how do we apply this technology in the development sector, and specifically, in my case, for agriculture. And I think early on, we realized that everybody was learning quite quickly. As you said, we had actually deployed a grant right before ChatGPT came out. And, one of the issues that we had identified was, when it comes to these advisory services, the information that farmers, need to make better decisions, to access services, to improve knowledge, was a challenge. And the area that we identified as a real challenge is sort of like, we could see that a lot of channels were available. So you had, SMS and IVR services and apps, and there were many of those out there. But it seemed like the research content, all of the new best practices were not flowing through to those channels. And so that was a problem that we had identified. And then ChatGPT came out and immediately sort of showed us that there was this fantastic tool, this new tool that allowed us to synthesize knowledge and information in a very efficient way. And so we were super excited about that. But really at that time, nobody really knew how to approach it. And so that's why we thought it would be nice to have a community of practice around this. A lot of people learning quite quickly, a lot of new models constantly coming out. It's rapidly moving. We ourselves, when we're making investments, our historical approach has been multi-year, long cycle investments. But here we had to make a lot shorter investments because we didn't really know, where things were going to be in 12 months and even 6 months. It's hard to predict. So just adjusting our approach to that. And I think having a community of practice is super important for that, cross collaboration and learnings on one hand, but also I think the other aspect is, AI requires a lot of data to really drive it. And we didn't have a lot of data representing smallholder farmers in these types of solutions. And so, bringing together a community around how do we share that data, build a much bigger corpus representing smallholder farmers for pre-training and post-training was really important. So, yeah, been pleased with the progress made so far.
Well, and you're right on, you've had to be very agile and responsive to this rapid evolution. So just how the foundation's operating in this new bold era of AI. But also, yeah, there's a lot of constraints or gaps that need to be addressed so that we bring emerging markets along with us in this, rapidly evolving ecosystem. And so you've laid out really a systems approach, I think, for the community to not only address the issues of data and data infrastructure, but how models are developed to represent underrepresented communities, especially women and girls. Benchmarking. So how do we compare these models? Localization of not just the data, but also how it delivers the insight to farmers in different contexts. Delivery, which is very important, especially as we look to partnerships with private sector, access to the policies that create the enabling environment. I mean, there's a lot of pieces to this complex system that that community is addressing. Why is this framing so important to you as you look at a portfolio of investments?
Yeah, I think it's probably coming from a place of, lessons learned. We would look back at the digital agriculture initiatives of 10 years ago, and you and I were both working in this space back then in different roles. But I think one of the key lessons was that look, we all thought digital agriculture was going to solve all of our problems, and all of these solutions were going to reach farmers. And I think that's true. We did have some successes there with some really great IVR solutions, SMS solutions, reaching smallholder farmers, and a lot of ag tech companies. I mean, it's been remarkable, actually, and we've supported some of those at the Gates Foundation, and you did here when you were here as well. Is a lot of these solutions in sub-Saharan Africa. I think there's over 750 ag tech companies. They've raised $1.5 billion over the last 10 years. Yet, when we look at the adoption of those services, it's been relatively low. You have, like, a lot of farmers might register for these things, but are they actively using them? Are they actively engaging with them? And that's often less than 10% in many countries. And so I think a couple of the reasons why these solutions didn't scale. One, I think, is the digital rails weren't there. It's really hard for a small ag tech company that's gotten a little bit of funding, or maybe they're funded by an NGO or a philanthropy, to really scale their service, because they don't have the underlying farmer registries. They often don't have mobile internet in many areas. They don't have solar maps. They don't have weather forecasts, and it's impossible for any one organization to build all of that. I think that was one key reason that these solutions didn't scale. The other, I think, is around the human-centered design problem, and that is, I think a lot of times we came in with a technology-first approach rather than understanding what the farmer's problem really was and whether this technology was going to solve that problem and how to design it appropriately. So I think that's sort of some lessons learned and the rationale for taking more of a systems approach to this, like to really think about the end-to-end. Okay, you can deploy an AI chatbot, but is it going to be accessible in local language? Is it going to understand local dialects? Is it going to have local market prices? Is it even going to have in the underlying model that you're using, whether that's Gemini or ChatGPT or Claude or one of the open source models from China, is it going to have the data that represents those smallholder farmers in the pre-training? So I think we've really got to think end to end. We need to think about the cost of these services. We need to think about the adoption and the active use. And we need to think about how to sustain them going forward, because, as we all know, AI is not a cheap thing to do. It's quite expensive. And how do we deliver at a per unit cost that's going to be acceptable to a smallholder farmer or those that are funding and supporting these types of services for farmers? Ideally, it's free for smallholder farmers.
Yeah, you raise a lot of really important points here. Not the least of which is, the business model for sustainability and scaling of these services, especially when you're dealing with, marginal farmers who, don't have a lot of resources to invest in these advisory services, and yet they realize the value that they bring, especially because they're tailored to the requirements of their specific farm and driven by weather data, market data, and other considerations to position farmers for success. So this is a real conundrum, I think, on the sustainability side. You also mentioned the digital public infrastructure. Africa is not as advanced as countries like India, where we're drawing a lot of examples from. What's your sort of vision or path forward when engaging with countries that have relatively weak digital public infrastructure? Is there, a strategy or plan in place to help those countries think through optimal investments to realize the digital rails for these resources?
Yeah, I think fortunately there's been a lot of momentum behind the idea of digital public infrastructure being a requirement for countries to provide services to their populations. And India has some fantastic examples like the Aadhaar system, and now, the MOSEP national ID platform, which is open source now in, I think, over 30 countries now. And so there is momentum behind this, and I think a lot of governments are recognizing the need to invest and support these types of rails, because it just unlocks all sorts of value-added services that you could build on top of, say, a national ID, being able to then open a bank account and then have direct benefit transfers going to that account. But then when we think about agriculture, how do we extend that to farmer profiles, to farmer registries is one thing, but I think it's a broader concept of an agri-stack, because you'd have lots of registries, for a farmer to get a tailored piece of advice, or to be able to get credit, or to get an insurance product, or you be able to be connected to a market. You need a lot of additional data to support that. You sometimes need, weather forecasts, you need soil maps, you need, transaction history about the farmer. How do you bring all of that information together for these use cases? And I think that's this concept of an agri-stack, where you have a sort of, you agree on these sort of protocols. Like there's a thing called Beacon Protocol that underpins some of the DPIs coming out of India that can be leveraged in the African market. So we don't have to build it again from scratch. We can reuse a lot of these open source tools that have already been deployed. And I think we're working with World Bank and others on initiatives like the Digital Agriculture Roadmap to design a roadmap for how do you build these solutions in a country? How do you justify the rationale for building those foundations through use cases? So what are the government's priorities on import substitution or food security or diversification into horticulture? And then, building the digital rails you need to support those objectives, bringing in the best from other countries, and then, trying to crowd in funding around the different pieces that are required, because it can be, quite expensive to build these things out. The other thing I think that's sort of interesting about the AI space right now is, I think it makes sense to build these, agri-stack deployments in country. Mm-hmm. But, interestingly, with these new conversational interfaces where you have two-way flow of information directly to a farmer, you can actually start to build up a profile about that farmer without having to do a big, government-led data collection effort. You can gradually build up a profile, just like, all of the Amazon or Netflix does with us. But that can be really, an alternative way, or in fact a complementary way to build some of that foundational information we need.
Yeah, we're fortunate that India has made these investments more than 15 years ago that can serve sort of guideposts for other countries to adapt that digital public infrastructure that is now well established and apply it for their own context. I remember a year ago in Kigali, Rwanda, where the AI Summit for Africa was held, and one of the resounding messages was, yes, we want to take advantage and apply these new tools in the AI era, but we want it to have some sovereignty over the data, the models, the infrastructure to unlock that impact. And so I think that's great that donors are working in concert in a coordinated manner to put in place that digital public infrastructure that's relevant for the African context. In doing so, what do you see as the biggest challenge in that coordination mechanism at a country level?
Yeah, I mean, it's you can never sort of control everything. I think a lot of people are really interested in investing in AI, so I think it's really about building consortiums at that national level. We're sort of taking an approach of, yes, people are going to have their own reason for building out their own solution that, they maybe want farmers to interact with, and they may have a business model around that. They might be selling finance or insurance or market tools, inputs, offtake, and so forth. But I think our hypothesis here is that, it's very hard to go it alone, especially given the data that's required to drive these models. And, we don't believe that any one organization can really do that, that it will require a corpus of information that, you need language data, you need, recordings of people speaking and transcripts of that, you need market price information, you need all of the advisory content that is relevant to the crops and value chains of priority in that country and the agroecologies of that country. And I think it's just so much to pull together. It's hard for anyone to do it alone. So that's why we think, sort of a consortium-led approach to this. Maybe it's like a PPP type approach where you could have a national, AI-driven advisory service that everyone has access to, and you can still, provide your own services to farmers, but tap into this back-end platform to leverage all of that data collection and the fine-tuning that it requires to tailor AI models for smallholders. And I think that's another element, is just it's very hard to get the expertise to do this too. It used to be, if you were a small ag tech company, you could hire one software developer and one agronomist and come up with something that was sufficient. But when it comes to these AI solutions, it takes a lot more than that. And, you can't, at least at this point, exactly use the off the shelf, out of the box AI solutions for smallholders right now, because they don't have the localization and the context.
I mean, the sharing of data, we sometimes refer to as a federated data system, where different organizations are contributing different pieces to that corpus of data. One of the challenges, it's been a historical challenge for research organizations in particular, but even companies and governments as well, has been the incentives for sharing that data. Some thoughts on how we can incentivize data so that, for example, a company could share their data, but not all the proprietary data, but some aggregate of it that then delivers value to a broader system.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge, and I think in the agriculture space, it's been a tendency to not share data. When I was recently at a roundtable with some of the big ag companies of the world, with their chief information officers and chief technology officers, and the historical approach has been to build out new IP, protect that IP, and then sell into the market and try to dominate that market, which makes sense. That's sort of been the landscape for many years, but very little sort of sharing of knowledge between those organizations. But I think right now, even they are recognizing that there are some challenges that they individually can't solve for, and that one of the other organizations might have the data they need to solve for a certain problem. So let's say a mechanization company has a lot of images of some disease or a certain crop or value chain, say blueberries or something like that. Another company, selling inputs or treatments for those problems might require that data to build a model that correctly identifies that disease through computer vision. That's a place where you could have some collaborations around sharing data and then building models. I think the other aspect is, how do you again, sort of access these AI expertise? So one of the investments we have is with the Institute for Agriculture and AI in the UAE at the Mohammed bin Zayed University for Artificial Intelligence. And really that's about matching these AI researchers with some of these agricultural problems, and try to bring the best AI researchers in the world to some of the best agronomists and agricultural researchers, and try to resolve some of these things on the data sharing. So I think if you can sort of set up a framework like that, where there's people are getting value out of it, there's a reason to share that data. But even beyond that, I'd say we do need new thinking around some of the licensing and terms under which you share data. I've seen some recent licenses where you can sort of clarify whether my data can be used for training a model or only for post-training, or yes, it's fine to use it for training, but you can't replicate my publications, through the AI model itself. So I think getting some clarity around some of those terms will really help unlock some of this data. And I think also some of the new technologies that maybe they're not so new, but they've been around for a while, but maybe not deployed sufficiently as a federated systems. So you can still host your data, within your own organization. You don't have to provide it all over to other organizations. You can sort of selectively decide what you're going to share with different organizations very easily. So I think there's some exciting things happening in that space. We have some investments with the CGIAR on this, with a project called Fairgrounds. And I think, we're looking at some new approaches to building that corpus and, building some of these vector databases so that it's much easier to incorporate into fine-tuning of AI models.
Yeah, I know. As you pointed out, the top of the interview was the role that data plays, and the old slogan, garbage in, garbage out. So, making sure we have quality data to do the training, make the refinements to these models so that they deliver value to the organizations generating the data, but most importantly, generating value for farmers to drive adoption.
It's interesting. Like many governments actually that we speak to about AI, we start out the conversation about AI advisory. They want to have a chatbot for their farmers or something like that. But very quickly it gets it down into data. Like that's often where the conversation ends up.
Yep.
And within governments themselves, being able to coordinate, they have many departments. You've got a livestock department over here, a horticulture over here, agriculture here, and they have siloed data sets. And so how do you integrate all these many data sets together, even just within the government, not even talking about going out to private sector.
Right.
And that's where another investment we have called Open AgriNet is an attempt to do that. It's getting some traction in India. Hopefully that's something we can reuse in the African market as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of the lessons from those grants and adapting them to other countries is going to be critically important to accelerate the whole process. So it's great that you've got an ecosystem of investments to help harvest the knowledge and practical application of AI for ag. One of the things that I think is a real challenge too, that we touched on briefly, was the business model for this. Any thoughts on, how do we sustain these efforts after an investment is made by the foundation or the World Bank? What's sort of evolving from your observation around business models that can sustain these efforts?
Yeah, it's definitely top of mind for us because we're closing our doors in 19 years, which sounds like a long time, but we've got to sort of be wrapping our grants up in about 10 to 12 years. And so that's something top of mind for us and I think we're sort of experimenting right now. We're trying a number of things. A lot of it depends on the specific country and what sort of budgets the government might have. So in a place like India, where the government tends to have sufficient budgets to cover these types of services to reach millions of farmers, part of the question there is, can we get the cost down low enough for a government to be able to budget for covering the entire cost of inference and managing the service and all of that. So and the benchmarks we have are these more traditional ICT services like SMS and IVR and Odisha, for example. We've been able to get the cost for those, I would call them generation one digital services down to about 18 cents per farmer per year. Now, I think the AI solutions are going to be more expensive than that, but that gives us a benchmark to say that the government's willing to cover that cost for up to 7 million farmers. One of the challenges we have with AI is that, traditional digital solutions, have economies of scale. So the cost comes down as you scale. It's sort of inherent in the design of those solutions. But we do have a challenge with inference, is it doesn't necessarily come, the per unit cost per call to these AI solutions doesn't reduce with scale. It's sort of stays consistent. And so I think there's, the companies themselves that are offering these AI solutions maybe, trying to figure out the pricing models that work at massive scale. There's a lot of interest in open source solutions for that reason, because you can host it on your own servers and but a lot of countries don't have that capacity right now. They don't have the GPUs to run these things. So in the African market, we're tending to look more at PPP models. So can we have some combination of government and private sector?
Yeah.
Sometimes that would be, sort of a co-designed, co-developed,
Do you think the telcos are going to play a large role in the case of Africa?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked to them for a long time and still discussing with them as to, is there value in them being able to provide an AI advisory service? I think some of them have tried to do this on their own and they've found it too expensive for even them to do. And
What
so
about
can we
processors or aggregators? Do you think there's an opportunity for them to offer that as a service? They pay for it, but in return, they get a more reliable, higher quality supply of raw material?
Yeah, well, that's where I was going to go next, was exactly that. Is in a place like Nigeria, we have some pretty significant input suppliers and off takers. So, your Indораmas or OCPs, flour mills of Nigeria, these types of companies, they, would like to see better quality output from farmers. They'd like to see farmers increase income and buy more of their products. So there is incentive there for them to invest in something like this. And I think, again, it's hard for them to do it on their own. Could you offer a national platform that they contribute something to, with the idea that this is free to everybody, free to all farmers, but there's benefits to those input suppliers and off takers. So we're quite excited about some of the work in Nigeria for that reason.
I know a lot of exciting times ahead in learning. Just to close off, Stewart, again, thanks for your time here. Your vision of success 5 years from now, you're looking at, a smallholder farmer, a woman sorghum farmer in Nigeria, let's stick with, what does her life look like once these services are rolled out?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully better. And, I think if you think about the potential here, if you could have a true sort of knowledge thought partner on your farming and what you're doing, it's like you have it in your pocket. You can ask it a question anytime you want. It understands your local language. I mean, the first time I've seen, women farmers engage with some of these solutions has been the first time they've been able to speak to a device in their local language. It's just remarkable. You just get immediate engagement. And so I think if they can trust it, if they're continually getting trustworthy information and they act on it and it works, then you build confidence that they can take actions based on this information. It's not just knowledge, though. It's also access to services that they can then get access to finance that they need. So, or they can buy a product and get recommended the right product. They can order it. That they can know that it's available locally. So all of these things adding up to them be able to get more out of their farming operation, that they're increasing their income. There's economic gain there. Whether that's increased productivity or reduced costs. I think that's, when I look back to when I first started this journey, about 6 years ago when I first joined the foundation, I was speaking to one of my colleagues on the DPI team, and we were just asking the question, like, why isn't there an Alexa for farmers? And what we were imagining was, an Alexa dot and a group of, a women's group sitting around asking it questions. Like it's sort of like some organizations now have AI as part of their board. It's just an advisor. You can sort of tap into that massive sort of wealth of knowledge accessible through that very simple interface. And I think this is going to be the interesting journey here, is like, how do we integrate these types of solutions into very natural, easy to use workflows that probably currently exist but can be augmented with AI. And I think I'd like to see that just be a very natural thing that people automatically go to and see a lot of benefit from. So super excited about that future.
Very exciting times, and thanks for this opportunity, Stewart, to reflect on some of the challenges, but also the vision and promise that this technology can deliver if used responsibly. And I'm glad you put out the word trust there, because for agriculture, that's a really important component of technology adoption as farmers trust in the technology. So again, thank you for sharing your insights with us. And yeah, let's make it real. And that's why Grounded Intelligence is a discussion around how do we build those partnerships to make this bold vision a reality in the shortest possible time. So again, thank you. And that's a wrap on our main course, but we're not done yet. Welcome to Bird Bites, the final segment of Grounded Intelligence. Let's dig in. Today, let's talk about rice. So this is a crop that's so important around the world. It's been feeding civilizations for approximately 12,000 years. But when we think about rice, let's not talk about a commodity. Let's talk about rice as a system. And that system depends on healthy soils, sufficient water, especially in the case of rice, which is often flood irrigated. It depends on labor, people to actually cultivate the crop, and of course, to process the crop and market it. So farmers are at the core of this, but they face uncertainty. And this uncertainty isn't new today with all of the challenges around the world. These uncertainties have been facing farmers for millennia. And so long before we had the technical tools around dashboards and remote sensing, farmers were having to make the best of what they knew around their environment, their soil, the varieties they were growing of rice. And so as we talk about this modern era of artificial intelligence and how it can be infused into our agriculture systems to offer unprecedented insights to farmers around how to manage their crop, let's not forget there was indigenous knowledge leading up to this point that we don't want to forget about, and we want to leverage it so that we can build on that past experience, but then complement it with AI in agriculture to put a finer point on the timing of operations, how to access markets for rice, and how to ultimately improve the profitability of growing rice, but also the quality of that rice for consumers, and also to manage the risk, especially against rainfall variability associated with climate change, and help farmers grapple with this rapidly changing world in which they're operating. So when we're talking about crop production systems, and in this case, rice, which feeds so many people around the world, let's not forget about indigenous knowledge and how we complement past intelligence with future intelligence to ensure food security and farm profitability around the world, especially for our rice farmers. That's it for today for Bird Bites. See you next time. Well, I hope you enjoyed episode 1, where we explored the Gates Foundation investments in this exciting area of artificial intelligence to empower farmers. One of the core themes that came out of this conversation was the importance that data plays in developing these models and refining them to better serve farmers. And so our next exciting topic on Grounded Intelligence is just going to be on that, data corpus. These data systems, how they're used, how they're curated in order to deliver the impact that we're aspiring to. So join us on the next session of Grounded Intelligence to learn more about the world of data.